So my name is Kim Kalasia, and I will be looking at teaching low-income Hispanic ELL students for literacy for English language learners. Why low-income Hispanic students? Well, if you look at the chart to the left, you will see that the number of Spanish-speaking English language students in the United States is incredibly high. And then if you look at my district in Waterbury, 2/3 of the EL population speak Spanish, are of Hispanic descent, and then an overwhelming majority of my students, 78%, fall below the poverty line, so low-income Hispanic students. That Venn diagram tends to have a lot of crossover where it's a high population of the students I work with. The current plan is pretty simple for the school. It's the breakdown that's pretty general. There's bilingual classes, which are the most sheltered. They can be into those for up to 30 months. There's ESL classes where students are removed from their typical English class, so my class, and instead receive their English services in ESL support. So they get that language support in a much smaller class with other students who are at the same language level, but sometimes, most of the time, speak different languages besides just Spanish. And then there's LEP for students who are identified as ELL but don't receive the support. In my classroom, because any ESL students would be removed from that period and go into the ESL support room, I don't see many students who don't have pretty strong language skills. They've usually graduated out of the ESL program by testing out, and so I like to support them because even though their language is strong, it's not always proficient. By doing vocabulary support, that means a lot of graphic organizers, a lot of breakdown of the vocabulary. The graphic organizers are also a breakdown of the writing process, sometimes the reading process. Extra time for constructed responses, especially if they ask for it. So if they tell me I had a little bit of trouble figuring out my wording, they can have as much time as they want. And then ESL support when recommended, which means that I say I think this student needs a little bit more help still, and they're occasionally pulled from their Unified Arts classes, and they just review some strategies with the EL department. Unfortunately, Hispanic students are the highest population for dropping out of high school. It's gone down significantly since the 90s, but you can see that in 2016, 10% of the Hispanic population ends up dropping out of high school. That's triple the Asian population, double the white population, and significantly higher than the Black population. So why are Latino youth among the least educated children in the United States? That just doesn't seem right. And one of the reasons is because ELL students tend to receive lower grades and are then judged by their teachers to have lower academic ability, especially when they score below students on standardized tests. Standardized tests are so problematic for so many different ways, especially against lower income and EL students. So that's a whole different PowerPoint. But all of these things create low self-esteem in academics. There are challenges, just different things compound, and they have the highest dropout rate. In my own classroom for 8th grade English, I see that the former ESL students tend to be a little shyer and unwilling to speak openly in the class. They do benefit from the extra time needed to complete assignments. I think that they're still translating a little bit in their heads when they're writing long form and stuff like that. And they do get hesitant to share out any ideas or present in class. One way to combat these problems is to really have parents involved in the school, in the community, in your classroom. Specifically, if Latino adolescents see their parents through gift and sacrifice, so giving something up so that their children, these students, could have more. Latino adolescents really respond to that. Future discussions, planning out where they're going to go to college, what they're going to do after high school. Are they going to get a job in a trade and go to a trade school? Or are they going to become a doctor or a lawyer? Really helps. And then school involvement in general and home involvement. For me, involving parents means phone calls home for good news and accomplishments rather than just that your student was disrupting class, they got a bad grade, so that there are positive feelings associated with the school and my communication with the parents. Meetings with the family at the start of the year to kind of talk about goals for the student, where they're at, a little bit of the culture so they feel comfortable with me. I also send a letter home. Encourage open house and conference involvement. So giving incentives to kids so that they encourage their parents to come, but also explaining to them that there are alternate times to meet if that very small window on a Wednesday evening is when they're working or when they have to take care of someone else, another child, or a grandparent or something. We do have some electronic translators which help us with automated voice calls and things like that. And then I like to try to build relationships with people who can speak the language in the school. So if I ever need a translator, I know who I can turn to, and it's someone who I'm comfortable with, so the meeting is a little bit more comfortable naturally. Some of the roadblocks, though, are we have to remember that a lot of low-income parents are working multiple jobs. They're struggling to meet the demanding schedules that they're getting at work. They don't have easy, reliable transportation all the time. Lack of English language fluency might make them a little bit intimidated to come into such a formal setting as a school and meet with teachers. And then unfamiliarity with the American education system just means they don't know what rights they have and their child has a lot of the time. Another way to improve Hispanic EL students' language skills is to provide curriculum in English and Spanish, because it allows students to demonstrate and activate their own background knowledge while validating the student's culture, language, personal experiences. Suddenly, these students are much more willing to share out. They get excited if you can find a text that maybe has dialogue in Spanish because it takes place, I don't know, in the Dominican Republic, and they're having conversations or saying words in Spanish, and the students can share out. That's really great for them. And then it allows students to comprehend the text and the curriculum better while building their vocabulary. And students who receive both English and Spanish dual language are shown to achieve where or above the peers in English mainstream are at. In my own classroom, I try to diversify the curriculum and the readings as much as possible. There are presentations about culture. As often as possible, I try to have it so that every student has a chance to share out things about themselves, their culture, and their family in the beginning of the year. Students can journal in their native language when we do morning warm-up journals. I don't read those, so I always encourage the students to write in whatever language they're comfortable in. And then I allow all my students, instead of always writing papers, to show their comprehension through the use of posters and more creative expressions, and then having graphic organizers available to help when it is a paper. Strengthening reading instruction is really important because poverty affects reading and reading outcomes really staggeringly. So improving that and verbal communication is really important, and you can do that with group work that is meaningful and deliberate groups where the student will feel comfortable, where somebody else in the group speaks Spanish, so that they can kind of share that. Maybe if the student is Dominican, this other student is also Dominican, so they can kind of bridge the gap of the classroom and the icebreakers with those things. Encourage relationships outside the classroom with students and teachers who speak the same language as the student. Presentations on culture, language, and food. And then I always try to make sure that I greet all my students, but especially have conversations with my ELL students first thing in the morning, so that that's how that starts their day, so that they can get used to talking to me in a low stakes way and get familiarized with it, get confident with it, so that when they do need my help, I'm a little bit more approachable. You want to focus on background knowledge and vocabulary through everyday environments, through comprehensive instruction, through assessments that capture complex thinking and learning. And a lot of this means evaluating yourself as a teacher, assessing the students, and asking for their feedback so that you know what you're doing well and you know what you need to improve on. In my classroom, that looks at real-world connections to curriculum, reviewing and reading the annotation process, working with vocabulary for text coding, context clues, and the breaking down of vocabulary. And all of this allows the text complexity to go up because now the student's background knowledge is going up. They become more engaged in the text. And the easiest way to make something like Anne Frank relatable is to have modern real-world connections of hate speech, oppression, propaganda, scapegoating, all those things, which a lot of ESL students can relate to because some people are so openly xenophobic, unfortunately. Unfortunately, there are roadblocks to this. My curriculum is very set, and I think that it has to do with like expired copyright, but it is very 19th century, which makes it very white, very male, most stories about coming of age are male stories. And then the ones that are female all tend to deal with things like Little Women and the March Sisters, which I really enjoy and some girls enjoy. I just don't know how much a struggling reader who has a loose grasp of the language is going to really get the manners of like 1865 Massachusetts. Standardized testing is also a really big problem. It's a big time suck. We have to do it for weeks at a time. For SBAC, we have to do it 3 times a year for our district. That takes about a week each time. So you're looking at months of instruction just spent on SBAC and other standardized tests. And it's a really big focus of our school, unfortunately. I also added this slide about COVID-19 and what we can kind of do as educators, because I keep seeing all these articles about special education suffering as a result of distance learning, but I think it's important to acknowledge that COVID-19 really is disproportionately affecting ELL students as well. But things like communication with parents, opportunities for your students to hear English and speak English, encouraging learning at home, making sure they have access to stuff is really important. And then in conclusion, it's really just parental involvement, making parents feel welcome and respected in the school. They're a needed, vital part. Dual language learning whenever possible, although that gets really difficult if it's not a super predominant language. Integration of culture into the curriculum, same problem if it's not a predominant culture sometimes. Vocabulary and speech building, and then again, support during the COVID-19 pandemic. And my references. Thank you so much.